My name is Rachel Mindrup. I paint portraits of people who have neurofibromatosis. Neurofibromatosis is a genetic disorder that can cause tumors to grow anywhere in or on your body. Currently, there is not a cure or treatments, but there are different foundations working towards that. Also, neurofibromatosis is also shortened down to just NF. Because it's a long word to say, it's easier to just say NF. So as I mentioned, currently there's no cure or treatments. NF is also a progressive genetic disorder, and it can manifest itself in many different ways. So you could have 20 people who have NF, and you're going to have 20 completely different sets of problems and manifestations. The reason for that is because of how that gene, how that chromosome mutates. It's unpredictable, so you just don't know how it's going to mutate from person to person to person. My son, Henry, has neurofibromatosis. I had never heard of it before. I couldn't even pronounce it for a long time. I had never heard of it. He was diagnosed at 4 months old due to having a large number of cafe au lait spots. Cafe au lait spots is just a fancy term for saying he had birthmarks that were sort of a light tan color all over his body. We took him into a geneticist. The geneticist did the test for NF, just sight. There was no blood work, nothing like that. He could just tell by sight that that's what Henry had. At that time, he told me, he said, your son has neurofibromatosis. He said, here's some pamphlets about it. Just raise him like everything is fine. Don't go home and Google neurofibromatosis, which back in the day when Henry was diagnosed, this was before we all had phones where you could just take your phone out and do it right there. So I had to literally get in my car and drive like crazy to get back home to my computer. And of course, Google neurofibromatosis so I could be inundated by all sorts of just horrible, heart-wrenching stories of people across the world who had all sorts of manifestations: tibia dysplasia, scoliosis, learning disabilities, blindness, deafness. The tumors are supposed to be benign, but they can turn malignant, so sometimes in some cases death. Just horrible, horrible stuff. And maybe it's a mother thing, I don't know, but for some reason I had to read every horrible story so I could sit there and bawl and assume that everything horrible was of course going to happen to my son. NF isn't like that, so it's not all horrible. You're not going to get every single manifestation. You'll get some, but I had to read it all. So I sort of went through that process of doing all of that. And then I came to a decision that I am just going to raise Henry like he doesn't have NF. Why make this be his defining characteristic? And that seemed okay until he was 2, and then he was diagnosed with an optic glioma, very common for people with NF, which is just essentially a tumor on his optic nerve. And at that time, we had to sedate him. Anytime when you have little kids going into an MRI machine, they wiggle around too much. So you have to sedate them for that 45-minute or hour-long scan procedure. The sedation would always make Henry sick. And then coming out of sedation, it would always make him cry. So when we had MRI days, they would tend to last the whole day long, just the coming out of sedation. And so that was hard for us as a family. But then there's some milestones that he missed, and he had some cognitive delay with some different things. And he has, as do many people with NF, he's got a lot of fine motor skill issues and gross motor skill problems. So we fast forward and we go into school, time to go to school, and I thought, why not just let Henry go to school? Nobody needs to know he has NF. He could be a little bit behind on things, but I thought my husband and I can work with him, and we'll just always keep him up to speed, and I don't want him to have a label, and I don't want everybody to sit around feeling sorry for him. I want him just to be Henry, not Henry, with a sad tone in your voice. So I thought we could do that. We, as far as elementary school, we got to the second semester of kindergarten before the teacher and the principal essentially called us out. So sitting in a meeting, they were sort of fishing around to see why Henry couldn't really use scissors. He can't really write at all. He's now in 7th grade and his handwriting is still really hard to read. So I had to confess at that time that he did have a genetic disorder, which surprised them greatly. And then honestly, the principal got irritated with me, angry, if you will. And he said, how can we help your son if you don't let us help your son? And I had never looked at it that way before. I thought I was protecting my son. But I really thought about what they said. And so I gave them the information they needed so we could then put Henry on an IEP, which is an individual education plan. Schools have that, so basically if your child does have a medical condition, you can get extra services, maybe a occupational therapist or physical therapist, or people can come into the school and really help your child outside of the classroom and get him or her up to speed. And so we did that, and it was a tremendous help for Henry, and I'm always actually thankful that that principal sort of called me out way back when. So in about 2008, I also noticed that for the most part, people have never heard of neurofibromatosis or NF. And it's hard to ask a teacher to make accommodations for my son when she doesn't really know what I'm talking about. So I thought I should do more to raise awareness. And in 2008, there's a couple of different NF charities and foundations, and I sent away to one of them to get some information about how can I be a parent advocate. And they sent back a pamphlet, actually a big envelope filled with information about their sort of NF endurance team, which is about like people who run and work out and run marathons and raise a lot of money. And that is really awesome, and that is not me. So that was a no. And I tried the next year because I thought maybe they've got some different packages and pamphlets, and I got the same thing in the mail. So I thought, I am not going to run or exercise, so I've got to do something else. I was on Facebook at the time, as a lot of people are, and so I thought, how best to help Henry? Maybe I should be connecting with people who have NF and just see what is their like, what is life like for them living with this genetic disorder? What sort of struggles have they encountered? And I was able to meet a gentleman named Reggie Bibbs. And I noticed back then that he was going around on Facebook and he had this t-shirt on that said, "Just ask," actually, "Just ask," exclamation point. And he learned that people wanted to know what was going on with his face. It's severely deformed with tumors. And why not just have a t-shirt that says, "Just ask," because honestly, I know you want to know what's going on with my face. And it was successful, and so people actually did it. It was like him taking ownership of it. And when people do ask him that, he just takes a little card out and hands it to him, and it's got the definition of NF on that card. And I thought, that's great. I said, Reggie's out there raising awareness. That helps my son Henry. This is wonderful. So I did a watercolor portrait of him. Just not a lot of time, kind of smaller. And I just gave it to him on Facebook. And I said, hey, you do so much to raise awareness. I don't really do anything. So I just did this watercolor portrait. I thought maybe you'd like it. And he did. And he made it his Facebook profile picture. And then he said, well, I've got a friend, Maurice, and he also raises a lot of NF awareness. Maybe you'd like to paint his portrait too. And I said, well, sure. I don't know who Maurice is, but I can find him on Facebook and get connected, and we did. And so I painted Maurice's picture, and I thought, oh, sure. And Maurice used his as his Facebook profile picture. And then I had a mom send me a message on Facebook, and she said, well, I saw Reggie's and Maurice's. She goes, have you ever thought about doing a kid with NF whose parents raise a lot of awareness? And actually I thought, I haven't thought at all. Like sure, okay. So she sent me a picture of her daughter, and I did the portrait. And you should know as well as I do, when you get a mom involved in anything, things explode. So so after I did that girl's portrait, because it's Facebook and everybody's connected. So after I did that portrait, I thought, oh my gosh, I came home and logged in to Facebook, and I thought there was like something wrong, because like all that little red alert thing and all these messages and stuff. And I thought, what is this? I had all these messages from moms, essentially moms, honestly, not moms and dads, moms, but from all over the country saying, well, hey, I raise a lot of awareness. I live in Indiana, or I live in Alabama, and I did this fundraiser, and I did this, and I did that. Would you paint my son or paint my daughter who has NF? And I thought, yeah, sure, okay. And it turned into a thing. Quite accidentally, it's this thing that I do now. And so then I thought, I better get organized here. And so I made a Facebook page on just the portraits. So if you were on Facebook, you just type many faces of NF, that's me, and you can see all these watercolor portraits. In fact, all of these watercolor portraits are the ones that are in that gallery there, going up the wall. And after a while, I started putting a qualifier on it, because I thought, I don't know who's fundraised and who hasn't fundraised, and that's too complicated for my brain. So at a certain point, I just thought, you need to donate to an NF charity. When I get the receipt that you have donated to the NF charity, then I will paint the portrait as a thank you. Your kid is, of course, benefiting from your donation, and so is Henry. So we all win. And I do that still. So I'm still doing that. I've done 150 watercolors and raised, a pretty good sum, I think, sort of that passive way of fundraising. So that was great. And then at some point, I thought, maybe the watercolors aren't enough. Maybe I should be doing something a little bit more. So, as most of you know, when people want to get their portrait commissioned, they typically will have it done in oil. You think of the President of the United States, you think of any building you go into, and the benefactor will have a portrait of him or her in oil in that entryway. And I thought, well, why don't I decide who should get their portrait done in oil and whose story should be done in oil? Being an artist has a lot of power that way. So I thought, I'm going to start sharing stories of people with NF who are out there really raising awareness and making a difference. And I can do that because I am friends with them on Facebook. And so some of these people in this exhibit, I've been following and watching what they do on Facebook. And I reach out to them, or they will reach out to me, and then we will start working on their portrait. And I decided I want people to be just doing everyday things on these portraits. So Reggie, for instance, is just having a cup of coffee. Joan is playing on her keyboard. Haley is working with her camera. So these are just sort of everyday things, or their hobbies. My friend Honor, who lives here in town, is literally eating guacamole because that's what we like to do when we get together. So just everyday sorts of things. And I thought, why don't I just depict them doing this sort of stuff? And then they can write their own biography to go with it. That way, if they want to tell people about the different ways NF has impacted their life, whether it's learning struggles, maybe they got bullied as a kid, maybe they had to get their leg amputated, whatever happened, they can decide if they want to share that with the viewers, or maybe they don't want to share that at all. Maybe when you read their bios, you think, well, geez, doesn't sound like NF affected them at all. So I let them decide. And after I've done so many of these, there's 33 portraits in here, I have noticed it's interesting what people want in their biography and what people are leaving out of their biography. So they're sort of crafting their story, which I think is pretty normal. I think we all do that. And like I said, everything's done virtually. So I've probably only met maybe a third of these people in person. The rest has all been done online, and they're all over the world. There's a couple people from the Philippines, the United Kingdom, Mexico, Australia, the Netherlands. And then, of course, all sorts of places over the United States. So we have to sort of work together. And so I feel like these portraits are actually a collaborative effort. I can't do any of these without them helping me, and each person has to get a friend of the family or somebody who knows how to work a camera to take pictures of them doing whatever it is we've decided upon. And they have a lot of patience. They will send me photos that sometimes are really terrible. I don't know a nice way to say it. I've gotten selfies before. I've gotten photos of people where they're like under a tree and there's like this big shadow across their face, and it's like, I can't see you. I can't paint this. There are people, it's like usually after about maybe 5 or 6 times, I think, okay, I'll just work with whatever I was given. So like I said, to me, it's a collaborative project. And then, like I said, when we're done, or not even when we're done, I always send them a pencil sketch first. So before I even do any painting, I will hand them that pencil sketch to make sure, like, this is happening. Do you like this? And it's at that point that then they can say, okay, move this around or change this or whatever. But for the most part, they at least know what they're getting. So like I mentioned, I've done 33 of these to date, and I'm really thankful. I'm thankful to Creighton University for allowing me to have this display in here. I'm thankful that people are coming into the gallery, they're reading these stories. Many people, most people, I'm going to actually say, haven't heard of neurofibromatosis at all. Not only that, a lot of people are looking at some of these different paintings and they're saying, oh, I think my cousin might have had that. They can look at that and they can see those little neurofibromas and some of those subcutaneous things and go like, wait, is that what my cousin had, or the next door neighbor, or somebody they knew growing up? And it's like, probably. I think that neurofibromatosis is probably the most common genetic disorder that no one has ever heard about. NF1 affects 1 in 3,000, so that's pretty common. They say it's more common than cystic fibrosis, Huntington's, and some sort of type of MS combined. But anyway, put a bunch of things together combined, and NF is more prevalent than that. And I think the reason nobody has heard about that is the exact same reason I sort of went through with Henry when he was younger, is I didn't want anyone to know. If nobody can see that you have a genetic disorder, why in the world would you want to blast it to the world and tell everybody that you've got stuff going on? And I think for a lot of people, if you've got internal stuff, why make that known? And at the same time, there is no real distinguishing thing, a characteristic for everybody. So I think that's also why it's really hard to raise awareness. If NF can manifest itself differently from person to person, you're going to have all of these different types of things from person to person. So that's really hard for people to sort of say, like, what's the look? And I realized that there is no face to the disorder. There isn't. I can't show you a picture of my son and say, that's what NF looks like. Or show you a picture of Reggie and say, well, that's what NF looks like. You have to see all the portraits collectively to realize there is no portrait to NF. It's going to affect itself differently. It's going to manifest itself when it wants to. Could be later in life. Like I said, it's progressive. To end on a positive note, like I said, there are a couple of different NF charities raising money for research to give to doctors, clinicians, physicians, all of this stuff to either do research or clinical trials. So there's all sorts of different NF clinics around the country. And then there's other NF groups that are great for adults with NF, meet other people with NF. So there's a couple of different foundations and charities that are doing amazing work. And all the donations, like I mentioned, go to these different charities. And I'm hopeful that my son, who originally, when I started, when he was diagnosed, I didn't know NF, I didn't know anybody with NF. And now my son, I think because I've done all these portraits, I think my son might think, oh, I don't know, like half the world has NF with all these portraits in our house. Not only is my son completely fine with his diagnosis, he's, I think he just thinks it's pretty common. And I'm gonna just end with his portrait over there. That's when he was 10 years old. That's a picture of him with a pocket weather alert system. He wants to be a weatherman when he grows up. Our local TV weather anchor at Channel 7, Bill Ranby, is his hero. He wants to be Bill Ranby, wants to go to school and be a meteorologist. He wanted the Doppler weather system that they use, that's millions of dollars. So we got him that little $20 pocket weather alert that he's using on that thing. He loves that. He loves that painting, but just in closing, he thinks the painting would be much improved if I would have painted a tornado behind him with like shingles from our house flying past his head. So I no longer ask him his advice on artistic matters. Thank you.